Before we get to completely new functionality for our game, I would like to take a short moment to refurbish our game a little visually. I thought it would maybe nice to have a real slingshot, similar to the one in Angry Birds. So a branch on the ground from where we can launch our birds. As of now, our birds are in the initial state, just kind of hovering above the ground, which doesn't really look too good. So let's add that. And I also think that making our bird just a little smaller would also be a quick way to make it look even better. So let's add the slingshot. And we are in our asset catalog, where we are now going to add this slingshot image that we can then use in the app. You can find this graphic in the resource folder, if you would like to use this particular one as well. I can then directly go back to the game scene, where I can then add the slingshot to the scene. In between add camera and add bird, I want to add a new custom method, which I will call add slingshot without parameters. I want to call this add slingshot method right here in the setup level method, right before calling the add bird method. Inside of the add slingshot method, I can then create a sprite node with the slingshot image that we just added, which is pretty simple and should not be a problem for any of us anymore. But we do need to think a little bit about how we are going to size and position the image so that it actually looks like our bird is sitting in the slingshot and isn't offset. So let's start with a constant called slingshot, which will be a SK sprite node with the image named slingshot to use our new graphic. Next, I want to think about how I need to scale and position the sprite node to be exactly where it has to be. It's not that easy, but if I talk you through this step by step, I think you will be able to understand exactly what we are doing. I'll begin by creating a constant called scale size, which will be a new CG size instance. What do we need this for? Well, we do know where our bird is positioned. I also know where I want to place the bottom of my slingshot, which is one that is on the ground. Based on these two factors, I have to calculate the height of my slingshot, so the sprite, and since we are going to use the aspect scale extension to scale it, I have to find the size here. So this should pretty much contain the goal height of the slingshot. Since we only need the height for this, I can press 0 for the width of my CG size here. And for the height, I will write mapnode.frame.mid_y divided by 2, which, if you remember correctly, is exactly where our anchor and therefore the bird is located, which then would be the height from the bottom of the scene to our bird. Since we want to place our slingshot on the ground tiles though, I have to subtract mapnode.tilesize.height divided by 2, which will then make this height slightly lower. I can then use this size to write slingshot.aspectScale, and then I want to scale this scale size. Width will of course be false, and the multiplier will be 1.0, which already should make sure our slingshot is the right size. What's missing now is the slingshot's position. So let's do slingshot.position, which will of course be a CG point. The x-coordinate should of course be right where our bird is, and therefore the anchor. So I'm going to do anchor.position.x, which will align it perfectly with our bird. And for the y value, we will make sure that it is placed right on our tiles by writing mapnode.tilesize.height. This would already be the point we need, but since the anchor point of our slingshot sprite is in the middle, I have to also add half the slingshot's height by writing plus slingshot.size.height divided by 2. I can then use mapNode.addChild and slingshot to add my slingshot. Now this should already work, but we would obviously want to make sure that our bird is always drawn above the slingshot. And since we did not yet specify an explicit Z position for it, this might not be the case. So let's fix that. And I'll go back to the configuration file where I can add a new value to the Z position struct as static let bird, which will be the CG float value 2. And back in the game scene, I can then, for my slingshot, add slingshot.zPosition is zPosition.obstacles, which was 1. And then for the bird, I'm going to add bird.zPosition is zPosition.bird, which is 2, the value that I just added. And this shows that our bird is always rendered above the slingshot. Before we run it, I will also change the scaling of our bird, like I said. As of now, we did scale it to mapNode.tileSize with the width set to false. If I now change this to true, our bird should be a little smaller, which might look better. But let's run the app to be sure and take a look. The app started, and if I now select the first level, I can see our bird is sitting nicely in the slingshot. I'm also still able to launch it, so this changed nothing in the game itself. It's just something visual to make the game look better.